So we're finishing up this series on how are you feeling. And what we've said is in this series that we grew up typically with two categories of our feelings, and the way you should feel and the way you shouldn't feel, right? And if you feel the way you shouldn't feel, then you need to stop feeling that way and just feel the way you should feel. And for many of us, that just hasn't worked out very well in our lives. And what we want to do is we want to understand that it's not so much how you're feeling. The question is really, what are you doing with the feelings that you have? Where is that taking you? And another way that we've expressed this is where are we going to take these feelings? The word emotion, we've said the word emotion is to mean to move. So emotions are taking you somewhere. And so we've used this sign, this turn sign, because you're going to move either one way or the other. And your emotions are going to take you one way or the other. Every emotion has an option of taking us two different directions. And it can move us closer to God, or it can move us further away from God. It can move us away from God and away from what God has planned for our lives, or it can take us closer to what He has planned for our lives. The question is, where is your emotions taking you today? Every emotion is a vehicle. We've talked about vehicles the last 6 weeks, and where that vehicle is taking you. And so in this series, we've talked about the vehicle of shame. We've talked about how the vehicle of shame wants to take you towards secrecy and silence and isolation. But if you invite Jesus into your vehicle of shame, He wants to take you towards freedom and forgiveness and grace. The vehicle of anxiety, we just had that one recently. You drive this one with white knuckle grip, right? Anxiety, because you just don't know when it's going to die on you, right? You just don't know when that anxiety car is going to die. And at any time it might just go out, and you don't have much control over this car. And this car wants to take you towards an isolation, and it wants to take you towards a place of despair and hopelessness. But when you invite Jesus into your anxiety, you invite Him into that vehicle of emotion. He wants to take you to a place of dependence on Him, and a place of community, and a place of peace that passes all understanding. And the last week, we talked about the vehicle of busyness. And this is the car that you just drive and drive and drive. And I think this is one that a lot of us really associate with. And you don't take time to change the oil or do the basic maintenance with this emotion, and then the engine locks up on you. And this is the car that when you're just pursuing what you lack, and you just think what you lack, if you could just get that, you'll find peace. But then you get it, and you find out that it's something else that you lack. You'll never find that peace, and it just doesn't work. So you invite Jesus in this vehicle of busyness, and the first thing He does is He hits the brakes, right? He hits the brakes on that vehicle. He's going to slow things down. He's going to help us find a rhythm that will restore us physically, renew us emotionally, and replenish us spiritually. So it's not so much how you're feeling, it's where are those feelings taking you? The emotions, what emotions do you have, and where is it leading you to? That's the big question. And so we've tried to talk about these different emotions in the way that allows us to move closer to God and what God has called us to be. And this is to help us mature more spiritually. This weekend, I want to talk to you about, as we finish up this series, about one it's a challenging one. It's a challenging emotion that a lot of people don't like to talk about. And all these other emotions have a tendency to lead you towards this one emotion. And the one emotion that tends to surface, no matter what the other emotions are that we're struggling with, that emotion is anger. Anger. And that's why it's sometimes called a secondary emotion. Anger is called a secondary emotion because it oftentimes is what surfaces out of the other emotions we're feeling. Dr. John Gottman describes this as the angry iceberg. Angry iceberg. Okay, so there's an image here of an iceberg. You picture this part of the iceberg, the top part of the iceberg being the anger. And it's what people see. It's what people, perhaps you recognize in other people, is this anger. But if you could look below the surface, if you look below sea level, there are all these other emotions that are just below the surface of anger. So maybe below it is anxiety, and that surfaces to anger. And you think you have an anger problem, but maybe you really have an anxiety problem. And now why would anxiety show itself as anger? Well, most of the time when you're anxious, we're anxious about something we can't control, right? We want to control something, we can't, and so it makes us anxious. And the person feels, you're feeling the circumstances and it's what's about to happen in the future. And when you feel out of control, there's something about getting angry that makes you feel like you're grabbing a little bit of control. It allows you to feel like you have control, but you don't. It gives you a false sense of power in the moment. Maybe below the surface is rejection and abandonment, that kind of a hurt. Someone has abandoned you, rejected you, betrayed you. You're hurt, but you show up as angry. Now, why would you do that? Because we don't want to feel that way, right? We don't want to feel hurt, abandoned, betrayed. You don't want to be weak. You don't want people to see you that way. So you don't want anyone to betray you, abandon you, or hurt you again. So you get bitter, and you get mean, and you get angry. But underneath is a broken heart. And your anger is just hiding your hurt. It's hiding what you really need to deal with. And so you find that many of our emotions will surface up as anger. And in this series, as we talked about emotions, we've looked at different psalms. And so this week we're going to look at a psalm that is an angry psalm. David in this psalm says something that will probably make you a little bit uncomfortable. And we've noted already that the Psalms are not prescriptive in nature. What that means is, as David's talking to us about anger, he's not going to give you a how-to manual on anger management. That's not how he works. Instead, what he is doing, what you have is you have David being angry, and he's going to let you be a part of that anger in that moment that he's feeling anger, and he's going to let you listen in on his prayer to God when he's angry. Now, these angry psalms are called imprecatory psalms. Now, imprecatory just means curses. Okay, that's just another name for that. Now, you may not have heard of this psalm before because you don't tend to read imprecatory psalms in church at all. You tend to read like Psalms 23, right? Psalm 23. You're going to see why in a minute, because instead of reading a psalm of praise and a worship and thanksgiving, these angry psalms just kind of represent what David's going through in the moment and the relationship that he has with God, that he's telling God something's missing. We're able to release our anger to God and to be honest with him about how we're feeling. So we're going to look at Psalm 109, one of the angriest of all psalms. So last week, just as a reminder, we left David lying down in green pastures along waters, quiet waters, right? Still waters. So this week, David's feeling a little bit triggered. Okay? So in Psalm 109, verse 8, David is talking to God about his enemy. He says, God, let his years be few. Let someone else take his position. May his children become fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children wander as beggars and be driven from their ruined homes. May creditors seize his entire estate, and strangers take all he has earned. Let no one be kind to him. Let no one pity his fatherless children. May all his offspring die. My goodness. Wow. He is angry, right? That's angry. Here's his prayer. In his prayer, this is his prayer. He goes, I hope he dies. I hope he loses his job. I hope he dies. I hope his kids suffer because he dies. I hope his legacy is nothing. I hope he has no friends. I hope his kids have no friends. I hope his kids die. In Jesus' name, amen. I mean, that's not how we learned how to pray, is it? I don't remember that, but I do remember the 23rd Psalm. Like, I don't remember memorizing this one, though, and reciting it as I went to bed at night. That's kind of not what we do, right? David is angry. Now, one of the things that is interesting to take note of is David was a warrior. He was a warrior who was traveling with an army. He then was a king, and all these things he prayed for, he could have done himself. He didn't, though. And so in these prayers, he is talking to God about his feelings. He's releasing his anger to God. I was thinking about what kind of vehicle I'd put him in for this emotion, this feeling of angry, and I landed on this truck that a friend of mine had when I was in the Air Force. And this was when I was stationed in Northern California. The truck had all kinds of issues, but the two primary issues was, number one, this truck, it was constantly overheating, constantly. And when you live in California, it's always hot, and so when you have a vehicle overheating, it overheats even more because it's hot all the time. And sometimes it'd get so hot, just so in reference here, my combat boots would actually start melting to the tarmac when I was on the flight line. That's how hot it would get. So it's crazy. So you can imagine that the vehicle would have overheating issues. You could just drive a little ways and you'd have to pull it over. And he'd put some more water in. We'd put coolant in, but stop at a gas station, drive a little more ways, and pull over, have to do it again. drive a little ways, do it again. I'm like, just get a new vehicle, come on. And the other thing about this truck was it was incredibly out of alignment, all right? So it'd be impossible for me to overstate just how out of alignment it was. You'd be going straight, and you could let go of the wheel, and it would just jerk, right? It would just jerk off to the left. You had to like crank the wheel. Oh, and there was no power steering either. So, I mean, I figure it's like wrestling a steer or something like that, you know? It's crazy. And so it can never go straight. But you had to just crank it to make it work. The minute you let go of that steering wheel, I mean, it would yank you, whiplash you off the road. You're in a ditch instantly. And it's just way out of alignment. And in this truck, like I never felt safe in this truck, ever. And I didn't like driving in this truck. I liked to drive in my Corolla GTS instead. You know, it was a faster car and it was fun. And it was actually known on base, right? I mean, his vehicle's known, and people made fun of it and things like that. And this is what it's like to live with some of you, right? Because nobody knows, they don't always feel safe, right? You're constantly overheating. They just want to stay out of the way because it feels like you could take them off the side of the road instantly, right? I can tell you, I drove that truck once, and driving this truck, even though I was driving, I didn't ever feel in control. And that's how anger is, and what it's done to some of you. Your anger makes you feel like you're out of control, and you just swerve off the road. You don't feel in control, and everyone who's riding with you doesn't feel safe. They're scared. And this is where David is at in Psalm 109. He's overheating. He's ready to run off the edge of the road. We're not told exactly who he's talking about, but most commentators speculate that it's a man that we'll read about here in 1 Samuel 25 by the name of Nabal. So we're going to study this passage together, and so David has this encounter with Nabal in 1 Samuel 25. Just by way of context, this is before David became king, so he's not king quite yet. And he's wandering from cave to cave. Remember, we talked about caves a couple weeks ago. But he's rolling around with about 600 battle-tested warriors. And they're living off the land, staying off the grid, right? King Saul has it out for David. He's hunting him. And so this is when he meets Nabal. Verse 2, it says, a certain man in Moab who had property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. And the name Nabal actually means fool. So that's who he was. He was foolish and angry and harsh and dishonest and manipulative. And in 1 Samuel 25, 4 through 8, it says, while David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours. Now I hear that it is sheep shearing time. When your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore be favorable toward my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them. Whatever you can find for them to eat. So David is making his case. He's being very respectful and very humble in this moment. I mean, this is a warrior who's killed tens of thousands and has an army of 600 battle-tested men with him. And he's being humble, and he's like, hey, what do you have for us? And we've been good neighbors. Nothing has gone missing. I've got 600 warriors here, and they're all they're a bit hangry, right? Everybody hangry? I'm smelling that chili. I'm starting to get there. But we've never had a rack of lamb from your sheep. We've never took one of your sheep. In fact, we have protected your flock. So would you please give us whatever you have that you can give us to eat? Well, in verse 9, when David's men arrived, they gave Nabal this message in David's name. Then they waited. Nabal answered David's servants, who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? Many servants are breaking away from their masters these days. Why should I take my bread and water and the meat that I have slaughtered from my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where? Okay, listen. Nabal knows exactly who David is. I just want to go through this. David's known. All right, he's a man that's known throughout. But he's not only rejecting David, but he's doing it in an offensive and demeaning way. He may be using He may be used to treating people like this in his normal dealings, but David's not used to being treated like this. So we see in verse 12, David's men turned around and went back, and when they arrived, they reported every word. David said to these men, "Strap on your swords." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David, while 200 stayed with the supplies. See, David's angry. There are 4 levels of anger that have been identified. There's annoyance, there's frustration, there's hostility, and then there's rage. Annoyance and frustration, hostility and rage. I'm guessing David, before this happened, was hovering somewhere in the frustration hostility range, and he lives with 600 men in the wilderness, right? That's probably where I'd be too. And so he's already a little on the edge. And then this happens, and now he's at level 4, I guess, and whatever strap your swords level is, I think that's probably rage. That's where he's at. Let's strap our swords on, we're going. And so David is angry, and the Bible doesn't say it's a sin to feel angry, but the Bible does say, don't sin in your anger. In your anger, do not sin. So there are some different crossroads that we have to come to when we find ourselves in the vehicle of anger. And so the first crossroads that we would be react or respond. Are you going to react in your anger or respond in your anger? And David, well, he's reacting. As soon as he hears this, he immediately reacts and says, "Strap on your swords." Now, David expresses his anger in a way that's pretty aggressive. Throwing swords on, that's kind of an aggressive nature there. Like, when he is overheating, you're going to know about it. Some of you might be like that with anger. You tend to be kind of identified by your anger. And if this is true, right? Sometimes that's people know us by, because we get angry too often. And you'll raise your voice, and you'll yell, and you'll call names, and you'll punch walls, and you get aggressive, right? Some of you are angry, but you don't act aggressive. It doesn't mean you're not an angry person, right? You're still angry. Like, you might be passive-aggressive. You might hear that one before. Where you withhold affection and attention and encouragement from people. You don't invite someone along, and then when they ask about it, you act like you forgot about it. Or being a passive-aggressive tends to be a favorite approach for Christians, because you can be mean with a smile on your face, right? Being passive-aggressive. Right? You can treat people in a way that's harsh, but you still have an out. And so I've learned to pay attention to some of the passive-aggressive things that people have said before they get mean. And one of my favorites is, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way, but." So I hope you don't take this the wrong way. If someone says that to you, "I hope you don't take this the wrong way," then there's a pretty good chance you're going to be taking it the wrong way. And the response then is, "Well, I hope you don't take this the wrong way," right? And it escalates, and it'll keep going. And some people get sarcastic when they're angry. Other people stonewall when they get angry. They shut people out. They ignore someone, give them the silent treatment. And in some ways, this is one of the cruelest expressions of anger. And you don't think of yourself as angry just because you don't scream and yell, but you're angry. I think one of the challenges that I've discovered is that oftentimes people who are angry don't realize they're angry, because they don't act it out in a way that they think is angry. When they think of someone who's angry, it's not who they think they are. And so David reacts. He says, "Strap on your swords." There is a lot of different ways that we can react, but instead, I think the Bible would call us to thoughtfully respond. Like, the message of the Scripture is not no anger, it's slow anger. Like, take a moment here, get some perspective. And in fact, James says everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So David and 400 of his men are armed and headed for Nabal, right? Meanwhile, in verse 14, we read, "One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, 'David sent messengers from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us. And the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Night and day they were a wall around us. The whole time we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, Abigail, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him.'" And this is the problem with angry people. is there are people who care about you and want the best for you, but they don't feel like they can. They don't feel like they can talk to you. And it's because you're too sensitive. And you think, well, I've never heard, no one's ever told me I'm sensitive and overreact, right? Because you're sensitive and overreact. Like, this is the challenge. This is a challenge. Like, for an angry person, the people who care about them are afraid to confront them because they don't want to make them angry. And that's what's happening here with Nabal. They don't want to make Nabal angry. Abigail seems to know how David is going to respond to her husband. She's an intelligent woman. So in verse 18, it says, Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 seahs, measures of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, go on ahead, I'll follow you. But she did not tell her husband, Nabal, any of this. So Abigail, she's brilliant, right? As we're going to see, the first thing she does is send her servants ahead with food. Remember the hangry thing, right? Hungry. It's a very good decision that she did this. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant named Don Pablo's there in Roseville. It's no longer there. Now I think it's like a Walgreens or something, but it's unfortunate. And I remember at lunchtime, you get men coming in on their lunch break, and they'd be short and irritable, and you place some chips down with some salsa, and everything was fine, right? You get some food in front, and they're good. And that's the kind of strategy that Abigail has. She is sending these men ahead, and she's giving food to them. Verse 20 says, as she came riding her donkey into a mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending toward her, and she met them, and David had just said, it's been useless all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so that nothing of his was missing. He has paid me back evil for good. And this is why David's angry. It's injustice. He sees this as an injustice. He's paid me back evil for good. I did good, and this is what he's doing for me. So David is justifying his anger and justifying his actions that he wants to take. And maybe you could do this. I was kind, I was generous, I was patient, I was thoughtful, I was accepting, and this is how they've responded to me. Right? Makes you mad, makes you angry. The Bible talks about righteous anger, and it sounds a little bit like this is righteous anger, but here's the key characteristic of righteous anger. It doesn't get angry when you're personally offended. So Jesus is an example of this. Right? Jesus got angry, but he never got angry with how he was being treated. He got angry when someone who was vulnerable was mistreated. And that's what made him angry. And so a test of spiritual maturity is, in your anger, are you getting angry because how you were treated or the injustice that you just experienced? Or are you angry because someone who can't protect themselves or care for themselves, someone who's already hurting and broken, that they are being hurt? It's a different kind of anger. And so Abigail's coming up to David here, and he's kind of just rehearsing in his mind what was done to him by Nabal. And in verse 23 it says, when Abigail saw David, she quickly got off her donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. See what she's doing? She's doing what's really hard to do when someone in your life is overreacting. She's humbling herself. It's hard to do when someone's overreacting and angry. Verse 24 says, she fell at his feet and said, pardon your servant, my Lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say. Please pay no attention, my Lord, to that wicked man Nabal, my husband. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. What she's saying to David is, David, please don't react. She goes on in verse 28. What she says is really just brilliant. Because she wants David to help him see a bigger picture. Like, David, right now, in this moment, I understand how you're feeling, but what you do in this moment is going to follow you for the rest of your life. This is going to make a difference in your life, what you do. Like the story that's going to be told about today, you've got to stop and think about it. And so that's what she says in verse 28. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles. And no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Verse 31, don't let this be a blemish on your record. Then your conscience won't have to bear that staggering burden of needless bloodshed and vengeance. And so a second crossroads when you're in the vehicle of anger is rehearse or reflect. Rehearse or reflect. Am I going to rehearse, or am I going to stop and reflect and think about why I feel the way I feel? See, David, we find him, he's just rehearsing. He's riding his way, rehearsing. And that's what a lot of us do when we're angry, right? It's like we've got this DVR in our head, and we just kept pressing the button that we've recorded. The words that were spoken, the words that were said, the lies that were spoken. And we've recorded the betrayal or an injustice in our life that someone has done. And when we get angry, we just push play. And we're afraid of what will happen if we just stop pushing the play button. I mean, if I don't remember what someone did to me, then doesn't it mean that person got away with it? Doesn't that mean it's injustice because they got away with what they did to me? So David is rehearsing this, and Abigail is going to stop him and ask him to reflect. Stop rehearsing and reflect on the situation. Just think for a moment. David, about this bigger picture you're in. And David, why don't you stop and think about why you're feeling this way? I understand you're angry, but you've got an army with you. You're going to wipe out this guy and everything he owns because he didn't grant your request with the right attitude. Where's that coming from? It's coming from somewhere. Maybe it has to do with the fact that King Saul is hunting him down. And he's been chasing him around the wilderness for a while. And David's so frustrated with King Saul, but he can't act on that anger. And so he's going to transfer the anger from King Saul to Nabal. It's that transference of anger. You stop and ask, am I really angry at this person? Or is there someone else? Is there something else? It's like the guy at a hotel. I don't know if you've seen this before, where the elevator isn't coming down as fast as it should, and they're like pressing the button, right? They just press it, because they're like in a hurry, and they get angry at the elevator because it's not moving fast enough. And it's like he's pushing the thing like it hurt him, and he's angry about it. And I think there's more probably going on in his life than the anger at the elevator. And it's not about the elevator. It's when the little things that's bothering you, and then you start to overreact, and you stop and reflect and ask yourself, okay, why am I dealing with this? What is causing this? And it's interesting, in Psalm 109 that we were looking at, David goes on this rant. And he's just so angry about his enemy. But there's this little verse in that prayer where he's vulnerable. And you may have missed it. And in verse 22 of Psalm 109, he says, "For I am poor and needy, and my heart is full of pain." So in the middle of this psalm about anger, he talks about being poor and needy and full of pain. See, that's the thing about an angry person. They may not know it, but oftentimes their anger is coming from hurt. And maybe you've heard this expression, hurt people hurt people. And it's true. Learned this again throughout my life over and over. You see it in people. So you just stop and reflect and ask yourself, why am I feeling this way? Why am I feeling angry? Where is it coming from? Process that as you pray with God about your anger. Another thing Abigail does is 7 times she brings God into the conversation. She speaks of God's plan and God's protection. An example is in verse 29. She says to David, "Even when you are chased by those who seek to kill you, your life is safe in the care of the Lord your God, secure in his treasure pouch." You're safe in his safe. "But the lives of your enemies will disappear like stones shot from a sling. Like stones shot from a sling." Okay, do you hear what she's doing? This is how we know Nabal knew who David was, because his wife knows who David was. She's brilliant. She's using a metaphor, and she's helping David remember another moment in his life where he was standing before a giant, Goliath, and he reached into a sling and he pulled out a stone. And God protected him then. And God will protect him now. And she's saying, David, you can trust God to deal with this situation. And so here's the third crossroads. Rage or release. Will I rage or will I release? Will I release this over to God? When I say release it, I don't mean you just kind of let it go into some mystical abyss of bad feelings. No. You release it. You say to God, here is how I want to react. Here's how I want to respond. You deal with it. That's what Psalm 109 is. David could have done all the things he's talking about, all the things he's asking God to do in 109. He could do. He is a powerful military might. But what he's doing is, in this prayer, he's saying, here's how I want to deal with this. You deal with it. And here's how the story ends. Verse 32, David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who has sent you today to meet me. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day, and from avenging myself with my own hands." Then David accepted her hand, what she had brought him, and said, "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request. We will not kill your husband." When Abigail goes back home, there's this party going on, right? And Nabal is completely wasted, so she doesn't tell him what happened with David. And then 1 Samuel 25, 37 to 42, starting in verse 37, it says, "Then in the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things that happened. And his heart failed him, and he became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. And when David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, 'Praise be to the Lord. Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept this servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head.' Then David sent word to Abigail asking her to become his wife. And his servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, 'David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife.' Verse 42, Abigail quickly got on a donkey and became his wife." So, David is out of alignment. He's overheating. But what happens? God uses Abigail to help David take a breath and not just react to the moment of how he's feeling, to help David reflect on the moment, think about the bigger story, to help David release his anger over to God. And David does that. He surrenders this over to God. And he invites God into his anger, and he says, "God, you deal with it. You take care of my anger for me." And then this is how the angry Psalm 109, this is how it ends. He's not angry. Verse 30, it says, "But I will give repeated thanks to the Lord, praising him to everyone. For he stands beside me. He stands beside the needy, ready to save them from those who condemn them." And in this prayer, David moves from anger and rage to worship because he surrenders his emotions over to God. I don't know what vehicle you're traveling in. I don't know what emotions you're struggling with. I know what you need to do. Doesn't matter which vehicle you're in. You need to invite Jesus into that vehicle. He's okay. He's okay with driving the vehicle of shame, the vehicle of anxiety, the vehicle of stress, the vehicle of anger, any of the vehicles. He's not picky. You don't need to upgrade before you invite him in, along for the ride. Don't even need tires. He'll ride in whatever vehicle you find yourself in. Just has this. There's just one requirement that Jesus has. You know what that is? He gets to drive. It's not you. You don't get to drive the vehicle. Jesus gets to drive the vehicle. And so that's what we want to do in the next few minutes. We want to just pull over to the side of the road, and we want to open up the door and invite Jesus in. And let's worship together. And as we worship, there's something about it that gets us realigned with him. It gets our emotions right. And if you haven't been baptized, you haven't given your life to Christ, like it says to do in the Bible, and it's time right now, this is the moment, come down and talk. We'll talk through this. We'll get you, the water's warm, I'm sure. I haven't checked today, but I'm sure it's warm. Bob takes care of it. And if that's what we need to do, we'll do it. We'll get it done today. Because Jesus is the only way that we can handle these emotions ourselves. And if we haven't given our lives to Jesus, then he can't take the wheel for us. He can't lead us in that vehicle, the direction we need to go. We're going to pray, and then we're going to be singing a song. And if you have something you want to pray about, or if you want to give your life to Christ and be baptized, come down front and talk to me. Let's pray. God, I thank you for your grace. And we need it all the time, Lord. And God, I thank you for the things that you have taught me, and starting with this church family, and I've learned that I've got a long way to grow on some of these things, but I really want to. And I really want to honor you in these ways, and I want to talk to you in the way that David talked to you. And I want to be able to share my heart and my feelings and my emotions with that kind of confidence and that kind of courage, but I've got a long way to go. I just want to thank you for the reminder that you're okay meeting us right where we're at. However we're feeling, that you'll stop and step in with the vehicle with us. And so I pray these next few minutes that as a church family, we wouldn't just be okay, we wouldn't be just fine or good, but that we would be honest with you, Lord, and that you'd be aligned with us as we worship, and you worship with you, and you put you in the right place, Lord. And it's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.